My name is Ivar Grimstad. I'm the Jakarta EE developer advocate at Eclipse Foundation. And this talk is about the migration from Spring Boot 2 to Spring Boot 3. And if you want to follow me on social media, you can use any of these coordinates. Every time there is a new, somebody says we're leaving Twitter, and there is a new social media channel, we have to add it to the list. But you can use any of these to contact me after the talk if you want to. So, even though the topic of this talk is about Spring and Spring Boot 2 to 3 migration, I want to touch a little bit into Jakarta EE first, just to have a foundation for what we're talking about. So, how many here are Jakarta EE developers? Some. Spring developers, then. More of you. OK, so my goal is, by the end of this talk, you will also raise the hand when I ask if you're Jakarta developers. It's not about converting you or anything, it's just realizing that you're actually using Jakarta EE. And when we talk about Jakarta EE, it's not a framework like Spring is, it's about specifications. And when we talk about specifications in Jakarta EE, in particular and in general as well, it's usually a textual description, some human-readable form, a PDF for HTML, which is a document. We have an API artifact that is available in Maven Central. That's what we as developers are using and seeing in our development tools. And we have a test compatibility kit, or a TCK, that is used to verify that an implementation fulfills all the requirements in the specification. So, and when a implementation passes the TCK, then it is a compatible implementation. And when we have at least one compatible implementation, we have a final specification, because then we verified that it actually is implementable. And Jakarta EE 10 is about a lot of specifications, and all the blue ones here were updated from 9 to 10. And as you see, that's more than half of them. Some of them weren't updated, they're good as they are, and there is one new one down in the corner. I'll get back to that one in a minute. If we peel away some of these specifications, are left with a subset of the platform, which we call the web profile. And the web profile is more targeting the traditional web applications. You have everything here you need to create a normal web application. What we did in 10 was also to create a new profile, which is called the Jakarta EE 10 core profile. And this is the first time we introduced a new profile since web profile was introduced back with Java EE 6. So it's been a while. And this core profile is targeting the headless or microservices kind of applications, where you have the RESTful web services and all the support and specifications to create a usual RESTful endpoint or a microservice. And we also have the CDI Lite, which is a subset of CDI, but enables us to do all the dynamic kind of things that CDI does at runtime, but do it at compile time, so we can compile to native with GraalVM, for example, if we want to do that. So this support that ahead of time compilation. And Jakarta EE 10 is based on Java SE 11, and that means we compile everything on 11 binary level, and but we make sure that the TCK runs on 11 and 17. So you as app developers can use any Jakarta EE implementations with 17 if you like, and most of them also run on 21 and higher. So, but we verified when we release 10, we verified it on 11 and 17. So how is this relevant to Spring? Well, we have to back to the previous version of Jakarta EE to see how it's relevant, and that is Jakarta EE 9 that came about 4 years ago. And with 9, we did one thing. And that thing was to change the namespace from JavaX to Jakarta for all our specifications. We didn't do anything else because we wanted the migration from versions previous to 9 and above to be as easy as possible, because we anticipated this will be some issue that will reach the community sooner or later. And it reached the Spring community when Spring Boot 3 came, or Spring Framework 6, because that's where you up the dependencies to Jakarta EE to the 9 and above, and you got the namespace in your code base. And that's because Spring builds on Jakarta EE. So when you say you're a Spring developer, you might as well raise your hand when you're a Jakarta developer, because there are so many specifications that are a part of or used directly or indirectly or just pulled in by Spring. So you're actually using more than half of the specifications without knowing it. And if you hadn't noticed before, you probably noticed when you upgraded from Spring Boot 2 to Spring Boot 3 and got the namespace change in your code base and suddenly discovered a lot of compilation errors. The next version of Jakarta EE will be Jakarta 11, and that will look like this. So it's a fair amount of updates. All the blue ones are updated, so it's about the same number of specifications, a little lower than 10. And we have a new data specification. So it's kind of the same group of specifications. We remove one and add one. And, but this is how Jakarta 11 will look like. You may notice I haven't put version numbers on this. So if we just gray them out and see how we're using Spring stuff directly or indirectly in Spring. And I'll start with the persistence. So anybody here using Jakarta persistence? If I say JPA or Hibernate, yeah? So Hibernate ORM is an implementation of Jakarta persistence. And Hibernate is pulled in if you use Spring data with JPA or any persistent stuff if you use ORM by default in Spring Boot. So if you're using persistence and Spring data there, it's highly likely that you have Hibernate in your code base. And one thing we did in the latest version in Jakarta 10 was to add UIDs as basic Java types in Jakarta persistence. And this is implemented by Hibernate, so you can do this in Spring Boot as well. So this is something that is just there automatically since we implemented it in 10, and Spring Boot pulls in actually the version of Hibernate that implements Jakarta EE 10 version of persistence, and not the Jakarta EE 9, which is the baseline. So they pull in Jakarta EE persistent 3.1. And that means that it is interesting to see what's coming in Jakarta EE persistent 3.2, because if you were at Spring I/O 2 weeks ago here in Barcelona, they said on stage that in the next version of Spring Boot will pull in the Jakarta EE 11 versions of some of these specifications, and Hibernate is probably one of them. So you will get this in your Spring Boot applications in August or September, around that time frame. And that is, you can now use Java records as embeddable types in persistence, in JPA. And this is not that relevant for Spring, but if you're using the @persistence context for some reason, you can now use @inject for this one, so it supports CDI. But you can do the persistence configuration programmatically by using the Java API for persistence configuration, so you don't need to have the XML files or property files to configure your persistence configuration. And there are lots of other changes, and one of those that are probably most important to know about is the deprecation of the old way of doing dates and times. So we're deprecating these and replacing it with the new Java Time API, which I believe came in, I can't remember which Java version, but it was probably 8 or before that. So it's not that new any longer, but it's sort of the new Java Time API, and we're replacing everything old with that. The old ones are still there and will work, but they are deprecated and at some point will be removed. And there are lots of new convenience methods for the criteria language if you're using that one. So if we look at validation, anybody using Jakarta validation? Yeah? So if you're using @notnull or @min or @email or something like that in your code, that comes directly from Jakarta validation. And Spring pulls in Hibernate validator that implements Jakarta validation. So that's what you're getting in Spring when you do your validation of your objects. And Jakarta validation is coming in Jakarta EE 11. It's already implemented in Hibernate validator, so it's likely that you will get it very soon in Spring if you not already have it there. and they now fully support validation of Java records. It has worked before, but it hasn't been specified by the specification, so now it's guaranteed to work. And also, this is the last one I'll go through of these, but servlets. So anybody using servlets? Yes, so you notice probably when you start off Spring Boot that it says here, Tomcat initialized starting service and starting servlet engine, Tomcat. So this is pulled in directly by Spring Boot when you create an application. So without servlets, Spring Boot wouldn't work. So this is a default. You can replace it with any other implementation such as Jetty or Undertow or OpenLiberty or something else. That's just a matter of configuration, but you will get Apache Tomcat by default when you use the Spring initializer to create your Spring Boot application. So if we make this overlay complete, you can see it's about half the specifications are indirectly or directly used by Spring. I won't go through all of these now because we don't have time in this talk, but as you see, there are about half of the specifications in Jakarta EE are directly used in Spring and Spring Boot. So let's do a demo. And the first scenario is if you're creating a new Spring app, and you probably know that in the Spring initializer, you can create a Spring app that is based on a package as a WAR file. You don't have to do the jar deployment. That's the default, and that's probably what most are using. But you can actually create a WAR file and deploy it into, for example, Tomcat, a servlet engine. So what happens if you create a new Spring Boot 3 application in the Spring initializer and deploy it into your existing Tomcat 9 that your IT guy in the server in the basement has installed for you? How will that work? So it will actually work fairly nice from the outside, sort of. It will deploy, it will start, there will be no errors whatsoever, but it probably won't do what you think it would do. Because what Spring Boot 3 has in its codebase is a Jakarta namespace servlet API, whereas Tomcat 9 is looking for a javax servlet. So it won't do what you think it would do. So what you have to do is to ask your people to install at least a Tomcat 10. So it has the newer servlet engine that is on the Jakarta namespace, and then it will work. Let's look at more code. So if you want to upgrade a Spring Boot application from Spring Boot 2 and move it over to Spring Boot 3. But first, let's take a look at how this application can look like. So I have this application. It's called Duke Boot. And we can look at the dependency here. It's on Spring Boot 2.7.8, which is fairly old. So it's due for upgrades. And it has a couple of dependencies and an in-memory database here, but nothing else. So it's a very simple application. The code itself is just a start the application. So there's nothing weird going on. And it has a RESTful endpoints. So it has this, I just have to reload the POM here. So it has this REST controller that injects a account repository, which is a Spring Data repository. And it has a post method where I can post and validate a user. And from this user, I just get the email, create an account, and save this account in the database. And it has a get mapping that just lists all users. So it will list everything that I have in the database. So this is all my logic. It's very simple. So let's run it, just to verify that it is running. So I'll just compile it, so you know that I'm not cheating or anything. So I'll build it here, and then I'll run it. And it starts, and if you manage to see it, it starts Tomcat, so you see Tomcat is running. So if I do some HTTP requests on this one, for example, the get users, you can see I get an empty list. And so what I want to do is post a user here with the email duke@dukes.com. So I post this one. It says user is valid. And if I now list it, it has a user in the database. And if I have an invalid email for this one, just Duke, and post it, it will say that I got a bad request. Right? So if I query it, I still only have one user in the database. So that's the logic. It just validates the email. So let's do this migration from 2 to the 3. And that should be fairly simple. Like in theory, it should be just to replace like the Spring version to, is it 3.3 that is the latest one now? So I'll just update this one. And in theory, that should be all I have to do. But now you see I get this compilation error from the @valid. And that is obviously about the first thing you meet when you do this from 2 to 3 is the javax to Jakarta namespace change, just by changing the Spring version. And of course, I can use the IDE to fix this. So in IntelliJ, you have this Java EE to Jakarta EE migration. And I know as Spring developers, pushing on this anything in the menu called Java EE is kind of something you don't want to do. It's a little dirty, right? But if you just get over that and click on this Java EE menu item in IntelliJ, it will do the migration for you. And it also omits those that aren't affected by the namespace change, such as SQL and naming and transaction and stuff, because they're still on the javax namespace. I can also use Open Rewrite. So anybody using Open Rewrite for their migrations? Yeah? So a couple. So Open Rewrite has a lot of recipes that are specific to Spring. So you can use those, and that's probably where you should start. Just go on Open Rewrite and search for Spring recipes. But you can also do a Jakarta recipe to do the namespace thing if you want to. And the good thing about Open Rewrite is that you can write your own templates and recipes and that are fitted to your architecture, your services, your company, and it can do much more than just this namespace. It can do every rewrite for you. So it's a very powerful tool to do this migration with. But you have to invest in creating a good recipe for your company, then you can just roll it out through every service you have. You can also do it manually. And that is sort of what I'm doing here. I updated the Spring version. And if I have any Jakarta EE versions, I probably should update those as well so I don't override whatever Spring pulls in, and then fix the imports. So that's what I'm doing now. So I got this compilation error, and this is so simple, it's just one. So this one I'll do manually and just change it. So it compiles, and when it compiles, it works. Or that's usually how I do it. So let's just do a clean package here. And oh, it failed. And what it says here is that there are some test failures. But anybody writing tests? Yeah. Yeah. So I didn't think I did, but for some reason the Spring initializer generates this test for me that just loads the context. That's the only test I have, and it fails. And of course, the easiest way of fixing this, do you know what that is? Just uncomment the @test annotation, and you're good. Huh? But let's not do that. Let's be professionals. So what's happening here? It has some issues with my code somewhere that is not in my project, so it probably has some dependencies somewhere, right? So if we look at this project, I do have a dependency here on Duke dep, because the database shouldn't have any problems and the others neither. So it has to be something with the Duke dep. And if you look here, the only code I have here is the RESTful endpoint and the application config, but all this account stuff, that comes from Duke dep. So luckily, I have the source for this DukeDep, and we can look at the account class, and you can see here that it has a lot of the javax namespace stuff, and it has this account repository. So the account class and this account repository has some javax imports, and that's where our problem lies. So my simple Spring Boot 2 application that I want to migrate over has a dependency. And anybody has dependencies in their apps? Yeah? One or two, maybe? Yeah? So there is a DukeDep there, and this DukeDep has to be migrated over to Spring Boot 3 as well. So if we look at the DukeDep here, the POM says it is on Spring 278. So obviously, we need to move this over as well. So I'll upgrade it to Spring 3.3. But what you also can notice here is that I have some Jakarta persistence and some Jakarta validation here as well. And while this is not necessarily needed, it could be that it didn't have any Spring dependencies at all. It just had the Jakarta dependencies. So if you have those, you should make sure that these are the latest version as well. So I'll update this one to 3.10, which is the Jakarta E10 version of persistence, actually. And also the validation is on 3.02, I think. And all these version numbers, you can find them on the Jakarta EE webpage. So I updated all these here. I'll reload the POM. And now you see all these compilation errors I'm getting, and these are way too many. So this is where I'll use this refactoring tool. So it's called migrate packages and classes, and Java EE to Jakarta EE. And this is where you want to kind of take your Spring T-shirt off, put on a Jakarta shirt, or do this if you don't feel that you can do this as a Spring developers. But it's actually, sometimes you can click on this Jakarta stuff, and it will help you a lot. So this DukeDep, and it can do all your projects. It's just a migration here, do refactor. Now it's only one file it does, but if I had like 100 files or 1,000 files in my project, it will do all of them. So it's a one-click migration for all that stuff. You can, of course, do a search and replace, but then you may replace a little bit too much. So this is probably the easiest way of migrating your own code and just doing this step here. What I also need to do is to re-release this, since this is the dependency of my project. So I'll be lazy and just call it version 2.0. You can use a classifier, for example, to say that this is the dependency 1.0 with the Jakarta EE classifier or something else, migrated or whatever. But I'll just bump the version number. And if I look in my Maven repository, you can see I have a version 1.0 of the DukeDep. So if I now do a Maven clean install of this one, it's installed in my Maven repository. If I now list, I have a version 2.0 here. And then I can use this version 2.0 in my application there and rebuild this one. So let's stop it. Clean package. So this is where the test failed, but now it works. So now I've done that past the context load of the test. So let's run it. And then I'll do the same test here by doing a duke at dukes.com. I'll post this. User is valid. And then I'll list, yeah, it has one user. It's an in-memory database, so everything I had is deleted, of course. And now let's try the invalid email and say, oh, it's valid still. And if you noticed, it was actually an error in my previous one as well, because I typed wrong. So what's happening here? It accepts crappy email addresses. It's the same code. I've just migrated it. So let's just see what we did there. So I had this Duke dependency. I had the source code for it, so it was easy. I migrated over to a version 2.0, but it still doesn't work. And I've done the Spring version, I did the Jakarta EE version, I fixed the imports, and I repeated for the dependencies. But it still didn't work. So I had something called transitive dependency. Anybody have transitive dependencies in their application? Yeah? They are fun, right? So if we look at the source code here a little closer, you can see in the user here comes from a project called dukelib. And dukelib is nowhere here. I don't have dukelib. And if I look at dukelib, you can see it has this javax validation constraints email. And it validates the email that is valid. So this is where I can have a hunch that the problem is from. But I don't have the source code for this one. So what do? We have the situation where I have a dependency that has a transitive dependency, dukelib. Then I have to move over and somehow get that transitive dependency working as well. And there may be many reasons why I don't have the source code for this one. It could be something I developed back in the 90s, and I've forgotten where the source code, or it burned, or I don't have the login to that desktop computer I had CVS on, or it's in Subversion and I don't remember how to use it because we use Git today. It could be any reason. It could be an open source library that is not maintained anymore, or it can be a commercial product you've bought and you don't have anymore. It can be any reason why you don't have the source code for this one. So we have the source code for Duke dependency, that's easy, but we don't have the source code for Duke library or dukelib. So how do we solve this one? Well, luckily, there is something called transformation. And transformation comes in these two. There are probably other products out there as well, but these are open source, free, available there. It's the Eclipse Transformer and the Apache Tomcat migration tool. And both these do exactly the same thing. They transform the bytecode from a namespace to another. So this is perfect for javax to Jakarta. They're actually created for that purpose. So by default, it looks for javax and transforms it to Jakarta. But you can configure it to do any other transformation. Like if your company is acquired and you have to change all your libraries for some reason over to something else, or for some reason you need to do this transformation, you can use these tools for that as well. They're very powerful. I will use the Eclipse Transformer in this demo. So I have in my M2 directory, I have the dukelib. That's where I have the only the jar file for this this transitive dependency. That's the only place I have this one. So what I have to do is, I'll just copy it from the M2 folder and into a temp folder where I can do the transformation. So I'll just copy the dukelib 1.0. So now I have the file locally. I've also downloaded the Eclipse Transformer from the link I showed you on the slide and put it somewhere on my computer. And I can use the Eclipse Transformer as a Maven plugin, as a Gradle plugin, put it in my CS system or wherever I want to do it. And I can also use it as a command line tool. And it's distributed as a jar. So I simply run it with java-jar, and then I put it here under my development tools folder. It's the Eclipse Transformer CLI 050. And then the input is the dukelib jar. So I do this, and now I have a dukelib and an output dukelib. So if we compare these two files, let me see, where do I have the temp folder? There. So if I do a comparison of these two, you see this is the dukelib. It has the javax validation. If I look at the output duke, it's now transformed to Jakarta validation. So I just did the bytecode change. So that's fairly simple. So what I need to do then is to get this this output file into the Maven repository. So, and then I can just do the Maven install file, where I take the output Duke file, put it in under the same group ID, artifact ID, and with a new version number or a classifier. And put it in my M2 folder, and now I have a version 1.0 and a 2.0 of the Duke lib. And this stuff is something, probably not something you should just publish to Maven Central, like, because you don't know really what's the license or whatever this stuff. So this is probably something you want to keep in your Nexus or a repository internal in your organization and not distributed. As a built-in dependency, it's fine, but not as a separate artifact. So what I have to do then is to go to the Duke dependency, find where I'm using this Duke lib, and upgrade it to version 2.0. And when I've done that, I'll just reload it. I'll reinstall this one to the M2. And when I've done that, I just have to rebuild this one. I don't have to change anything because it's the same version I'm using. So Duke boot, I just have to repackage. Like, so if you change something deep down in your dependency tree, you need to kind of build all the way up. So when I start this one again, and now we're going to do the same tests. So I'm saying Duke at, I have for some reason gotten, there we go. So I do the valid email. It says user is valid. And if I check the database, it only has a valid user there. If I do the invalid one, it now says bad request. So now I'm back to where I was and have a working application again. But by doing the bytecode transformation and re-releasing the Duke lib and then building the way back. So the list gets longer. It's update the Spring version, update the Jakarta EE versions if you have any, fix the imports, repeat for dependencies, and transform the libraries if necessary. Like, hopefully you won't have to because you have the source code of everything, but if you need to, you can transform the libraries. And of course, you could have done this from the start, just taking the first application you had and just transform it, and never care about anything else and just never rewrite it, and always just have the transformer as a step in your build process, but sooner or later, that's probably going to fail. So there also may be some additional migration steps. It's not necessarily that relevant for Spring applications, but if you're having some properties, for example, configuring Hibernate in some way by using, for example, javax caching strategy or something, that property needs to be changed to the Jakarta caching strategy. So every property prefix with javax needs to be transformed as well, if it's used by a Jakarta EE implementation underneath, which there are quite a few of in Spring. And also, if you do this dynamically, you need to check that as well. So what about Java 22 then? Now I had that in the title, or it was 21 and then now it's 22. Anybody using 22? 21? 17? Yeah, 11? Yeah, okay. So usually at this type of demo, I would do a demo of, I've been running on 22 all this time, so it works fine on 22. Usually here, what I would do is to show how we configure a preview feature in Java 22, but the preview feature I usually used was the string templates, and you know what happened with string templates? So in 23, it's removed. So if you use preview features, which is fine, they're just as good as any other feature. They're tested, everything, they're in there for a reason. But you should be aware that they can be changed and removed in later versions. So you need to be on the upgrade path of upgrading every release then. So I think I'll skip that demo. So if you look beyond Jakarta EE 10, Because as you see now, the Spring framework pulls in some versions of Jakarta EE that comes from Jakarta EE 9, some that come from Jakarta EE 10, and the next version of Spring Boot will pull in Jakarta EE 11. So you will have a mix of any specification that can come from 9, 10, or 11. And that will hit you probably in August or September when the next version of the next kind of baseline of Spring Framework comes out, Spring Framework Core or whatever it's called. So that's why as a Spring developer, it's good to know what's coming beyond 10. And beyond 10 is 11. And just as 5 minutes before the talk, I was asked if I could fill in for Graham later today since he's not able to come. So at 6 this afternoon, I will do a proper walkthrough of what's coming in Jakarta 11. So if you're interested there, you should come to this room and get this boost your performance and developer productivity with Jakarta 11 and Java 21, which will be 22 actually, today in this room. So I won't do so much about Jakarta EE 11 here. So Jakarta 10 has a lot of updates. And as you saw, some of these, or many of these, are brought into Jakarta EE, or in Spring Boot 3. And it depends on which minor version of Spring Boot. If you're in 3.0, 3.1, 3.2, 3.3, will be very different versions of what they pull in. It's kind of, they usually take what's latest in that implementation. So the latest version of Hibernate may give you persistent 3.2 already now in Spring Boot 3.3, but I think you have to wait till 3.4 to get it. But it doesn't have to be a major version of Spring Boot to get actually a new platform version of any of the specifications in Spring. So I hope this talk showed you how Jakarta is relevant to Spring, because if nothing else, the namespace kind of disrupted a little bit in this industry this year. But I hope you got some tools there, because we've been doing it since 2019 when Jakarta EE 9 came out. So these transformers were built then, and they worked very well. Because Spring builds on Jakarta EE, and this is the overview of which specifications that are directly or indirectly used. Like mail, for example. Anybody using Java Mail or sending mail from their applications? If you're not using any service in like Amazon or some other provider, you most likely are using some Java Mail or Jakarta Mail, and you're using it directly in your application. And as well as messaging, Spring provides a lot of stuff underneath there. It very heavily relies on servlet, as you saw, and all the others are being used in more or less a degree, such as persistent validation, which I went through today. And obviously, the most thing you will get interfaced directly when you do the upgrade is the javax to Jakarta namespace change. And these are the steps for doing a migration. Of course, there were some issues with Spring Boot 2 to Spring Boot 3 that weren't Jakarta related. I haven't covered those here. So you'll probably notice those. I've heard the security part were a little bit breaking, and some other things that you may need to look at the migration guide at spring.io or look at the open rewrite recipes. That will help you with it. If you want to get started with Jakarta EE, you should check out jakarta.ee. That's a very easy URL to remember. That's where you get all the information about Jakarta EE. We have a starter similar to the Spring initializer. It's called Start Jakarta EE. You know, whenever the Spring community does something good, we copy it. When we do something good, they copy it. So it's a very give and take kind of two communities or one community. I write a weekly hashtag Jakarta EE. That's where you get all the newest stuff, what's happening in Jakarta EE. So if you want to know what will come in some minor version of Spring pretty near future, this is a good blog post to read. You just get a weekly feed. It's like a 1-minute read or something. And the demos from this application is on my Jakarta EE Spring on my GitHub. And it's a step-to-step guide. You can do the same steps as I did here today. If you want to learn about Jakarta EE, I have a course on LinkedIn as well called Jakarta EE Overview. It gives you a nice badge on your LinkedIn profile. So you can go there and do that if you have a LinkedIn Learning subscription. So with that, I say thank you for listening, and I hope you will come here at 6 to listen to the Jakarta 11 update. And I hope you enjoyed it, and we have some time for questions. And please do visit our booth out there and get some sunglasses and hats and stuff. So thank you very much. Any questions? Comments? Yes.
Okay, so yeah, just a curiosity. If I recall correctly, in Tomcat 10, there is a mode where you can actually deploy a Word file and it will do the conversions automatically.
Okay.
So I'm not sure if Spring Boot provides this or something like this out of the box, and wouldn't it be like a good replacement for that transitive library example that you said before?
Yes. So the question is, some products like Tomcat and most of the Jakarta EE implementations have the transformers built in. So you can drop a javax namespace file into that, and you can do that transformation on the fly. And whether that will work in Spring or Spring Boot, or it would be a good idea to have that version of Tomcat in, yes, it could be. But I would still recommend that you actually do the transformation before you do that deployment step. But yes, you see, in my demo, that didn't work. So that version of Tomcat that pulls in automatically doesn't support it. So you may need to do some configuration to get it to work. But it should be possible, yes. All right. Thank you very much for coming, and see you around the rest of the day.